Now, people usually complain about French cars because they're unreliable, and that's usually down to their motors. So what happens if you take out a petrol motor of a French car and put in an electric powertrain? Well, you get this. This is Peugeot's first electric car here in Australia. It is the Peugeot e-2008. Now, make sure to review your car on productreview.com.au. There you can check out reviews of other people who've owned and driven cars like the Peugeot e-2008, but you can also leave a review of your car there. My name's Cameron. Let's get into it. Now, the 2008 is an attractive, small little SUV. It's quirky, it's French, it's for people who want something a little different from the mundane small SUVs you can buy. So I can understand why people would buy that car. Now, the top spec GT model gets a 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol motor, where this, you'll have to pay a bit more money to go and make this thing electric. So yes, Peugeot wants you to pay $59,990 before on-road costs for this car here. And so that puts it in competition with other electric cars that are quite good, like the Hyundai Kona Electric and even the Tesla Model 3. And there are some EVs that undercut this. There's the MG4 and also the BYD Atto 3. But let's first take a look at what you get in terms of features, where you're getting these really cool LED lights. You also get a body colored match grille here, which is kind of cool, looks a bit different. You also get 2008 up here on the bonnet, but you get your Peugeot line there on the front. You're getting silver accenting and also contrasting black accents like here on the roof and here on the side. And the way you can tell this is an electric 2008 is because it says the letter E on the side in blue. Now down here you're getting 18-inch wheels, which are alloys, but they have plastic inserts in here, which is kind of interesting. You are getting power fold mirrors. You're also getting keyless entry and locking here on the driver's side doors. You're also getting these big roof rails as well. And if you're someone who likes avant-garde styling of French cars, well, you're going to find it here on the 2008 because there's a lot of creases and curves on the bonnet, on the doors, and even up on the roof. Now, it always disappoints me to see electric cars not make the most of the fact that they're electric cars. So instead of a frunk or storage area up front, you're getting your electric motor and parts of your drivetrain underneath the bonnet of your 2008, which is a bit disappointing. But it's interesting to note that the max power output for this car here is 100 kilowatts and 260 newton meters of torque, and it sends power exclusively to the front wheels through a single speed gearbox. So of course, here's your charge door on the rear left-hand side. So it will take you around 30 minutes to charge from 0 to 80% using a 100 kilowatt hour fast charger. So the ones you're usually going to see are the 50 kilowatt hour fast chargers, so expect it to take nearly an hour to charge from 0 to 80%. Now it'll take around 5 hours to charge from 0 to 100% from a 3-phase wall box, which is going to give you around 11 kilowatt hours when you're charging it. And then it will take you around 7 hours and 30 minutes to charge from 0 to 100% through a single phase wall box, which is around 7.4 kilowatt hours. Now you should know that the range here is only 328 kilometers WLTP estimated. So that is something that might be a bit troublesome for people who are buying a $60,000 electric car. They might want a bit more range than that. But if that amount of range sounds fine, then sure, the e-2008 has enough range for you. But for most people, that might sound a little on the low side. Now the back, you get Peugeot spelt out across the back, a Peugeot line, a GT badge to let everyone know that this is a top spec 2008. And you also get the letter E to remind people that this is the electric 2008. You also got here some pretty nice tail lights. I like those a lot. A rear wiper, and I do also like this roof spoiler back here. And the contrasting black roof is a very cool option. Now you're getting some silver accenting here on your big, beefy plastic bumpers, but you're getting a manual tailgate, which is disappointing for a car that costs over $60,000. And also what's disappointing is that the quality control here doesn't feel so great. It's because these plastic handles here don't feel too sturdy, and also I'm seeing some wiring poke out from the plastic here, which isn't a great sign for a car that will cost you, yes, over $60,000. But what is cool is that you do have 434 liters of storage back here, which is nice, and some additional underfloor storage for things like charging cables. But yeah, it's not a massive amount because there is just a battery that has to exist under here, and that means you're not getting a spare tire, only a tire repair kit. So you get some small storage pockets on either side, and that's pretty good. You do get this hard cover in the back, but your seats do fold in a 60-40 split. So for the most part, I did find this boot to be very usable. Now, as a 5'11" adult, I fit pretty well back here. These seats are fairly comfortable. They're a bit firm in the rear, but they have a very cool half cloth, half suede, and half leather type material. There's green stitching back here. There's 2 USB Type A ports here, but no air vents. sense. But there are some matte pockets back here, and we do get a glass roof, but it doesn't extend over our heads in the back. Now my feet are a little bit cramped if you want to make the most of your space up front as front passengers, but you will have to move a bit more forward to make a bit more knee room for an adult. Now, there's lots of harsh plastics back here, but we do have some faux carbon fiber to make this thing feel a little bit more exciting. We don't have an armrest in the middle, so yeah, it just feels a bit sparse here in the back seats for the price tag. And the middle seat is usable, but it's going to be a bit tight because there is still a transmission and exhaust tunnel, even though this is an electric car, so that is a bit disappointing to see. But at least the headrests are nice and plush, and your windows in the back unfortunately don't go down all the way. They only go down this much. But I do feel like I have decent amounts of feet room underneath the seat in front of me, so for longer trips I feel like you can carry 4 adults in here quite comfortably. But if you need to put a child seat in the back, there are little zips here that allow you to access those attachment points. Now, it's pretty comfortable here in the front seats of the 2008, or I should say e-2008. You do have this small leather wrap steering wheel with GT on it, which for some people it can feel a bit awkward to get comfortable with because this does block your view of the gauge clusters. So you have to adjust it to make sure it doesn't do that, and then you'll get your ideal seating position. We have metal finish pedals down below. We do have some nice carpets in here, and there is a lot of green stitching, which is a pretty interesting touch, and a lot of that faux carbon fiber running across the dashboard and into the doors and also around the gear selector. Now the gear selector is quite cool. It's like this lever that you push forwards and backwards, and it does have a B mode, which is for regen braking. Now there's soft touch materials up the top here, which is nice, but as soon as we get on the lower parts of the doors, it quickly becomes hard plastic. But I do like these seats here. They're really nicely contoured and very comfortable. So Peugeot's seats are excellent, except it's very annoying that the driver does get massaging seats and electric adjustment, but you don't get that at all here in the passenger seat. It's a manual seat that doesn't even have massage functions, but it at least is still heated. Now you get a 10-inch touchscreen here, which has a bunch of functions in it for your climate controls, your car controls, and your navigation, but unfortunately everything is hidden in the screen. So you do have physical buttons all down here, but they're just to access either defrosters, locking, or some quick AC controls, but other things are all inside the screen. So above that are just menu buttons. But at least you still get a physical volume dial, which is very good. But unfortunately, Apple CarPlay still requires a wire, even though this does have wireless phone charging, and you have this weird little cubby in here, which is quite interesting, and a little shelf as well. So if you want to watch things in your car, you can rest your phone against there, which is quite useful. You have a USB Type-C port on the other side, and there's lots of piano black plastic through the middle here. You have a drive mode select rocker here as well, and you do have some physical buttons here on the steering wheel for your volume controls and skipping track and all that. But unfortunately, Peugeot have decided to put the cruise control stalk behind the steering wheel, so you have to learn to use this by touch because you absolutely cannot see what functions you're pressing unless you know what you're pressing based off what the screen is telling you, without having to move your head way to the side, which is way too dangerous to do while you're driving. And you do have a start engine stop button in here, which does require a long press to get things started. So yeah, I just would prefer to have no start stop like some other electric cars, but at least this feels a bit more conventional to people who might want that. But what is cool is this gauge cluster. It's a 3D display because it uses a projection of a screen on top onto an angled piece of glass or display, and then you're able to get a 3D effect from that. And it's very usable. It has plenty of useful information, and I think it's far more interesting to look at than most other boring gauge clusters. And you've also got these stalks here on the side, which are like 3D and wrapped in chrome, and that will show you where your indicators and other warning lights are, which is kind of cool. Now what's hilarious is that the glove box is so small because you cannot fit anything in here due to a fuse point access on right-hand drive models taking up most of the space. So that means Peugeot themselves have creased and folded in the driving manual to fit into this smaller area, which is just hilarious to me. So yeah, your glove box area is super limited, but you do have this very deep center console cubby, but you have this tiny little tray here, which I've just used for my AirPods and my house keys, but you could probably put your actual key in there if you'd like. For the most part, this is a really cool interior, but for some other people, they don't really like it. They feel like it's a bit overcomplicated and it just feels a bit too busy. But for people who like it, you'll love it because it's all driver centric. And I also think that Peugeot could have put one more bolt into the door handles, which just flex a bit too much for my liking, especially in a car that costs this much. But you're probably wondering, what is an electric French SUV like to drive? So I've driven a few electric cars by now, and jumping into the Peugeot e-2008 is a bit of an interesting experience because one, Peugeot is like that avant-garde French brand that you're okay to make some compromises with because you love the design, you love the way it looks, and it's got some luxury features that maybe some other cars don't have at a lower price point. Now, the e-2008 takes the 2008 SUV and turns it into an electric car. So this shares the underpinnings with a petrol car, except this is riding on a modular electric car platform, meaning that you can actually get a decent amount of range out of this battery. Now, like I mentioned, you can get just over 300 kilometers of range per charge, and depending on which drive mode you're in, you'll get closer to that figure. So if I start in eco mode, I'll get closer to that 300 kilometer figure, which is an WLTP range estimate. But then if I go into normal or sport mode, as you amp up your power, so in sport mode you're getting 100 kilowatts of power, in normal 80 kilowatts, and then in eco you're getting 60 kilowatts. So depending on how much power you're demanding from the motor and battery, you will get a different range. If you're okay to buy a Chinese electric car, an American electric car, a German electric car, well, that's where this starts to fall short. Now, it's quite efficient. It does have a claimed efficiency figure of around 14.1 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is very, very low. So that's something that's quite impressive. And I have seen my range last me quite a decent amount of time while riding around in this. But here's the thing, you don't even get that much range to start off with. So this is primarily going to be a city-focused SUV. And if you're doing long road trips, you ideally have a different car, or you are comfortable riding in an electric car that will require more stops along a road trip, because this will need more frequent charging compared to something that might have a 400 to 500 kilometer WLTP range. Now, driving around in this thing, there is literally no noise, there's no fake noises, there's nothing here to sort of suggest that there might be a petrol motor under the bonnet. This is a very silent car, and it's one of those things where French cars are not known for having super reliable petrol motors. So what happens when you take out the petrol motor and put an electric motor in? Well, I actually think I prefer this quite a lot. You are getting a lot of the avant-garde features of a Peugeot, like this small steering wheel, the futuristic layout of the interior, and you're getting luxury features like massaging heated seats. But then you're just sort of getting a pretty normal driving experience. There's nothing quirky or different about this electric powertrain. It's a front-wheel drive, front-motored powertrain. So what it feels like is a front-wheel drive car. So if you put your foot down, you will get a bit of torque steer in the wet, but I found the way this feeds its power on as well to be quite interesting. So it just sort of gradually feeds the power on. So even if you're in sport mode, it's most unlikely that you're going to encounter embarrassing wheel spin, unlike some other electric cars that are front wheel drive. I tested the first generation Hyundai Kona, and that thing was a wheel spin machine, and it was kind of embarrassing actually, because you sort of feel like a hoon even though you're just trying to put on a monstrous amount of torque at very low RPMs. Where this, when you put your foot into it, it doesn't feel as immediate as some might like, but I guess the advantage is that you get a more restrained and more well-behaved electric car. Now, I do love the torque when you need to accelerate from a moving speed. It is just very immediate. So from a standstill, it's not going to be anything like a ludicrous Tesla, but instead you're going to get something that's going to feed you an appropriate amount of power, and you just sort of get moving a lot quicker than you would if you're waiting for a gearbox and a turbocharger to kick in before you started actually moving. Now, a big gripe I have in this car is the placement of the actual radar cruise control systems. They're down on an independent stalk, which is fine, but I can't see it at all. Even if I move my head up and down, I can't see the controls. And yes, they're all physical buttons, so eventually you will remember them, but that is so annoying that you just can't feel. So I have to feel around, and sometimes I activate the speed limiter, sometimes I don't know how to activate the speed, so it can be very frustrating just having that independent stalk that you can't see from a normal driving position. You just have to rely on feel and memory. But this car is really easy to modulate its speed, so I can just sort of rest my foot on the accelerator and use the regenerative braking mode to be able to just, you know, modulate my speed but I don't feel like I really need cruise control. One, the steering is quite light. It feels almost steer by wire, and it feels really like ideal for daily driving. It doesn't require a lot of lock to lock to be able to turn. You can just sort of cross your hands over and you'll make a lot of sharp turns, which I like quite a lot, especially in this smaller form factor steering wheel. And also just using the regenerative braking mode, which is the letter B that you press just here. and it will allow you to just, you know, pull off the throttle, and then the car will do some regen braking, and you can see everything that this car is doing in terms of how much power it's delivering, how much regen it's getting, just by the little dial on the right hand side of the gauge cluster. Now, I can appreciate there's no need for a heads-up display in a car like this because you've got this higher up dashboard layout, so that's actually pretty good. And then I also like the active blind spot monitoring. That's pretty useful as well. Now, the Peugeot e-2008 does feel like a safe space for people who want a electric car but don't want a fully futuristic one that just has a center screen. I'm looking at you, Tesla, but they want something that doesn't feel as boring as a conventional car. So that's where brands like Peugeot and BYD come in with a slightly more exciting interior to make it feel like you're driving something a bit more special than just a conventional petrol car. Now, the sound isolation here is pretty good. I can just hear some ambient noise here in the tunnel, nothing major. The road noise is really quiet as well. And I do like in here, you have the ambient lighting, which looks quite nice and just adds a bit more flair. Now, the thing I love about front wheel drive, not very powerful electric SUVs, is that it feels like you're driving around, you don't have to spend a whole bunch of money on fueling this thing up, and it's something that's very easy to get around with, and if you're just going from A to B, it's very easy to live with, and you don't have to worry about visiting the petrol bowser. The price of petrol doesn't really freak you out, and then yes, over the long period of time, you are producing less emissions compared to, say, a petrol counterpart, so you might feel better about that. And then with the added benefit of having a heavier car, it does feel more planted and weighty on the road for longer trips. But I want to know if Peugeot's carried over any exciting elements from their other exciting cars like RCZ, any GTIs, or maybe even Le Mans cars into the e-2008. So I'm sorry to report, but there is not really a bunch of Peugeot's performance DNA in this car. Now, as we enter this highway here, I'm just going to go into sport mode to give us our full performance in this EV. You do notice that this thing will start to kick up a little bit, which is always good, and it's not very exciting. I'm sorry. It's like, I wanted to try and make it feel like a little bit more exciting, and it's just really not. Like, you've got some mid-range pull, so if you've just like never driven an electric car, you might be like, hey, this is kind of cool, but like, yeah, it's not going to be the performance EV you might be hoping for if you see just, you know, this thing looks good, it's got cool LEDs, all that sort of stuff, but unfortunately, yeah, it's not super quick. Now, it does make merges really quite easy, so that's all right, but then once you're sort of on the highway, you don't really need all this power, so I just knock it back into Eco and it gives you a bit more range. And even the mid-range acceleration Eco isn't too bad either. It's pretty on par with a decently turbocharged four-cylinder that you might find in a competitor to this car. Now, handling in this little SUV is actually quite fun. So it's not super heavy. Yes, you do feel the weight of the batteries, but you do feel like you can be a bit more nimble in this thing. And the small steering wheel and the fast steering ratio means that you can only just tweak the steering wheel and you'll start to go in the direction you'd like. And I really quite like how that's sort of engineered in this way. It doesn't really feel like a docile, big, heavy whale of a tiny SUV. Instead, it feels quite sprightly, and maybe if you have driven some less powerful petrol-powered Peugeots, you might be impressed by how immediate the feel of this steering is, and also having a pretty responsive engine as well, motor in this case. It does help out quite a lot for making this thing feel a bit more exciting than it should be. And then combine that with the regen, you actually do get a pretty good one-pedal driving experience, although I do find that I have to be on the brakes a bit more because it's not that aggressive a one-pedal driving experience. And unfortunately, it is just the one regen mode. There's no different types of regen you can get like you can get in like a Hyundai, but here it's just the one type, which can be a bit frustrating because I might want a bit more of an aggressive regen to allow me to use my one pedal maybe just a bit more, but instead, yes, you will be reaching for the brake pedal more than other EVs that have adjustable regen. Now, the most impressive thing to me was the suspension. Now, this thing is heavy compared to a petrol 2008. And, you know, you could expect it to crash over some speed bumps and sort of, you know, be a bit funny in terms of how it behaves over potholes, and even just have a bit of a harsher suspension feel because it's just trying to combat the weight of those batteries. But instead, what I found is that this thing really does have a plush ride, and you can go over some decent bumps and this thing will just sort of float over and then settle quite quickly. So it feels really relaxing. I go, okay, all right, that's, you know, something a bit different, and it feels a bit more refined end than a more affordable EV. So that was something I really quite liked. And it just feels very planted as well. This feels like it has quite a wide wheelbase for a small SUV like this. So it really helps with making this thing feel planted on a road when you're going through faster corners. But you will explore the edges of that suspension quite easily if you are very generous with your speed over a speed bump. That's when you will feel a bit of a crashing sensation with the suspension as it sort of rebounds quite quickly after going over a speed bump, maybe a bit too quick. But for the most part, it's just quite relaxing and comfortable, and these seats are very good. I find the seating position to be quite natural as well, although if you have larger legs, you might find this small steering wheel position to be a bit awkward at times. And I also do like the indicator sound quite a lot. It's very snappy. Now, something I can appreciate is the braking in this car is actually quite nice. So if you do need to put your foot heavy on the brake and stop quite quickly, yeah, this does a good job of just stopping rather than feeling like they're an underpowered set of brakes in a heavier car. But I think if you're looking for the best electric car for your money, you're not going to find it here in the e-2008. But that's not a problem for Peugeot. They've designed this for a purpose for people who like that French avant-garde style, but they don't want a petrol version of a French car. Instead, they want an electric car, and that's where this steps in. But like I said, it's not the best electric car, and that's when I would be looking for alternatives like the Tesla Model 3 or maybe something from MG or BYD. But as always, I'd like to know your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know there if you would buy an electric Peugeot. And remember to review your car on productreview.com.au and follow us on TikTok and Instagram using the handle @productreviewcars for more car content. My name's Cameron. I'll see you in the next one.